Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Insight APSAD webinar series. My name is Michelle Taylor, and I will be your host today. I'm one of the clinical educators at Insight and an occupational therapist. As you can see, I'll be able to monitor anything that you put into the chat. So if you have any questions, please place those there. And we aim to have a little time at the end of today's presentation for those. So to begin, I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I am coming from. That is Meanjin, Brisbane, which is the Turrbal and the Yuggera Nations people, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I acknowledge the traditional owners of those countries that you are watching from today and pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. And I acknowledge any First Nations peoples who are here with us. I'd like to recognise people who have lived and living experience of concerns related to substance use, mental health, trauma, suicidality, and all of those who support and care for them. We recognise their immense contributions and the wisdom that they bring. Now, today, on the eve of National Occupational Therapy Week, which starts on the 24th of October, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce to you occupational therapist, Meg Schneck. And Meg has been working with parents and carers and young people who use substances with the Logan Alcohol and Drug Service. She's also worked as the team leader with Communify's Safe Space Support Service. And the title of today's presentation from Meg is One Size Doesn't Fit All, Exploring Ways to Support People Who Use Substances to Build and Strengthen Self-Regulation Skills. So I really do look forward to hearing from Meg now because as we know, people use substances to meet important needs around changing how they feel and to feel more empowered in terms of their bodies and their regulation. So Meg is going to be sharing some practical and creative resources that she has co-developed in the workplace, and she'll be looking at these important areas of self-regulation, emotional intelligence, and sensory strategies. So thank you, Meg. I'm going to hand over to you now and look forward to hearing from those in the audience as we go along with any questions.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thanks again for inviting me along to present some of these cool resources that were developed during my time at the Logan Alcohol and Drug Service, more specifically in their Ladders team, which is the youth AOD team there. And thank you for everyone for dialing in. I'm a little bit overwhelmed to see the amount of people that have chimed in, so feeling really grateful and hoping that you'll get something out of today as well. So I'm just getting control of my mouse. So yeah, I won't reintroduce myself. Michelle pretty much got that covered, but I also just want to extend thanks to the UQ students that were involved in the development of some of these resources that I'm going to share with you today. So they were final year occupational therapy students that worked with me over the course of a semester on an action learning project to explore ways to support self-regulation. I'm dialing in from Yuggera country, so here in rainy Brisbane today. Also want to extend my respects to First Nations people and their elders past, present and emerging. Also recognising people with lived experience of substance use and mental health, because without them, you know, we can't be responsive and learn. And in the spirit of talking about self-regulation, I do just want to do a quick shout out to the Safe Space network that has recently been developed on the Brisbane North Side. So this is an amazing community-based support service that does aim to support people with high levels of emotional distress. It's peer-led. So far, they've had really great outcomes. So I've just popped the link down below if you want to learn anything more about it, but they're doing some really cool work around supporting self-regulation in that space. So today, it's going to be centered around talking about self-regulation and sharing resources to support that. I'll just give a brief little overview of what self-regulation is, talk a little bit about the project background and why we put the time and effort into it. I'll share the resources, share a couple of examples in practice, also some reflections and time for questions as well. So here we've got a few things that I'm sure everybody that has chimed in has heard in some capacity before from the people that we're supporting, depending on the context. So challenges around managing body arousal or energy states is often a presenting concern for people that are accessing AOD and mental health supports. Some things we might hear is that I need it to sleep, or I need it to calm me down or chill out. So this might be around the more depressant type substances that are slowing down our central nervous system. Similarly, on the opposite end, this idea of I can't get going in the morning without it, or I need it for energy, or it helps me perform, can be more around those stimulant or alerting type substances that are speeding up the nervous system. And I don't want to talk exclusively that this is stuff we hear from clients. At the moment, I'm sitting with about 200 milligrams of caffeine in my system. So I am definitely a person that I've, created this dependency and this narrative that I can't get going without coffee in the morning. So it's always good for us to reflect how this might also have some truth to ourselves, our friends, our family as well. It's not just stuff we're hearing from people that may present with substance dependency. So self-regulation, what is it? It's a word we hear a lot in the AOD and the mental health space. And if you kind of do a deep dive into the realms of the internet and academia and research, you'll probably find slightly varying definitions for it. I really like this one here. So this one is from Marianne Rosenbaum. So the act of managing thoughts and feelings to enable goal-directed action. So this isn't just about, self-regulation is not just somebody's ability to be able to calm down or somebody's ability to control themselves. It is much more complex and broad than that. So there is, Marianne Rosenbaum presents a diagram to try and conceptualize the different components that are kind of impact somebody's ability to regulate themselves and their bodies in order to complete a certain task. So and I'll talk about this in context with a couple of examples over the next slide. So we've got the biology or the physiological levels. So that's what our bodies are doing. Is it slowing down? Is it speeding up? The next circle, we've got the skills that somebody has to be able to influence what their body arousal levels or those energy levels. The next circle out is somebody's motivation. So if somebody's trying to, wind down to go to sleep, but sleep is not very important to them, it may impact their willingness or their want to implement those skills to then downregulate their body to get themselves ready for sleep. Next circle is, it says caregiver support. So this diagram did come from a little bit of work more around young people, but we can think of caregiver support as external supports. So in the context of this diagram, it might be, say for young people, the caregiver does play an important role in providing that calming or alerting stimulus through co-regulation with the young person. because they may not have been able to figure out how to do it themselves yet. And the next circle, the last circle out, is the environmental context. So do the physical or sensory components of the environment line up, or do they not quite fit with the levels of energy arousal that we need to complete a goal-directed action? So I'll talk a bit about it more in context over the next slide. So the first example I've got is sleep. So sleep is a very low energy activity. It's something that we do need to have our bodies slowing down to be able to complete this activity effectively. So here, the example goal-directed action is somebody wants to go to sleep. So on the biological level, we've got our circadian rhythm, which is our body clock, which tells us, which influences those sleep-wake cycles, what we might feel on the body level is increased drowsiness, yawning, difficulty focusing, all of those things that sort of signal that our body is slowing down or getting ready to go to sleep. Some skills a person might have to support that goal-directed action of going to sleep is that awareness that they are sleepy. They might have done some work around sleep hygiene, so having those regular sleep-wake times, having a warm bath before going to bed, avoiding screen time, that sort of thing. They may also have their own calming strategies that they've found to be able to support them to go to sleep or to reduce those energy levels to be able to complete this activity. Their motivation, they might know that it's important for their health, that they need it, that they enjoy sleeping. I'm one of those people, I look forward to it. Similarly, on the other end, if somebody doesn't really value sleep, or there may be some fear around sleep time because of nightmares or an unsafe sleep environment, then it could be something that is actually not supporting them to be able to effectively wind down to go to sleep. They may have some support. So that is, if you say again, I'll use the caregiver example, or if you have a whole house that's sort of winding down around the same time, that can be supportive as well. On the environment side of things, the physical components, do you have a bed to sleep on? If you're a shift worker, is it day or night when you're sleeping? Does that go with or against your body's natural circadian rhythm or body clock to let you know? Do you have a quiet space to sleep? That sort of thing. So all of these things together does impact somebody's ability to be able to effectively regulate themselves to be able to reduce those energy levels to go to sleep. So on the flip side, I've got a really high energy activity here. So this is where we want to be more alert, be more awake. So the example of sports. So somebody wants to play a football game. I won't go through all the components in as much depth as the sleep example, but essentially some of those needs are the opposite. So on the physiological level, everything is fast speeding up. You need increased reaction time, attention, endurance, focus. Do you have those alerting strategies to be able to get you up and get you going? Like if you have to, be ready to play football at 7 a.m., but you usually wake up at 8 a.m., what do you need to change to be able to be prepared to play sport when you would be sleeping at that time? So it does take quite a lot of skills to be able to recognize the levels of energy arousal that you need to be able to complete that task of playing a sport. Why do you want to do it? For fun, for health? I can almost guarantee if somebody is really into sports, loves it, loves the feeling of it, there may be more motivation to implement those alerting strategies to get their bodies prepared and ready to go compared to somebody that might be just dragged along and feels like they have to do it and is really not getting that intrinsic sort of enjoyment out of it. All right. So with those two examples in mind, it does take a lot of things. There's the biological level, skills, motivation, supports, the environment, all of this stuff influences somebody's ability to be able to, you know, prepare their bodies for those task demands. So it kind of makes sense when there might be a link missing, or potentially some skills that aren't there yet, that people might be drawn to substances to change the way they feel, because it skips out on a lot of steps. It goes straight for that physiological or the biological level of being able to speed up or slow down your nervous system. So in the example for sleep, we often do see people in AOD or mental health settings that do become quite dependent on, say, alcohol, benzos, or cannabis to be able to fall asleep, because particularly if they do live with, say, you know, anxiety, or have experienced trauma, where those are things that do speed up your nervous system, it can be quite difficult to be able to meet the sleep you know, requirements to be able to do that effectively. So kind of makes sense. Similarly, if they want to speed up their body, it might be more of those stimulant substances, so amphetamines, caffeine, that sort of thing. And then we have one that's sort of outside of these. If people want to alter the way they interact and respond to their sensory environments, they might be drawn to those more hallucinogen type substances there. So this is where I'm going to introduce the resources that I'm going to be talking about today that were developed as part of this action learning project. So we've got the Body Zones ladder on the left-hand side. And then we also have the Body Zone pocket tool, which is on the right-hand side there. So I'll spend a big chunk of the rest of the presentation kind of talking a little bit more in depth about these and how they can be helpful to have those, you know, really broader and meaningful explorations of self-regulation with the people that we are supporting in the work that we do. So as I said, it was UQ final year OT students spent a lot of time with me at the end of 2021 developing these resources here. So I won't talk a lot about the action learning style of research, but essentially it is where it's a cyclic type of approach to service development, where you identify a problem or a challenge. We don't have to call it a problem. So here it is that self-regulation challenges are a really common presenting concern for people accessing AOD and mental health supports. It is something that is a maintaining factor for people continuing to use substances and I guess finding it challenging to change that. So that was the problem. Another thing was that there weren't a heck of a lot of resources available to explore self-regulation in the context of people's routines and what they're doing in their day-to-day life. So from that, you discuss and reflect, you identify some potential solutions, implement them, and then evaluate it. And that sort of leads on to the next action learning cycle. The project aims, so a big thing was that AOD clinicians, and not just clinicians, essentially anybody that is working with somebody that has challenges regulating their body energy or arousal states. So having readily available access to resources to support self-regulation, supports and interventions. And with these resources and conversations that go along with them, the aim to support people to improve and build skills in being able to regulate their body states without substances or with less substances, and in turn increasing function and participation in meaningful activities. The next two aims are more around promoting the value of occupational therapy approaches and ways of thinking in the AOD space. So very much focused on improving and supporting that participation in people doing the things that they want and need to do in their life. So this is a practice context. These are a couple of counselling rooms at the Logan Alcohol and Drug Service. So it is a community alcohol and drug space. There are psychosocial and medically assisted teams. It is clinical. There's also peer support integrated into these teams as well. Here we're talking a bit about the student learning goals, and it was a profession-specific placement. So a lot of it was about being able to learn how you can work as an OT in the AOD space. And a lot of that is around learning how substances impact somebody's function and participation, and being able to work with them to support them to do the things that they need to do in their life. Also making some of these resources accessible to the MDT, to everybody that is working on the team as well, because I think that's where some really great work can be done, where we are learning and sharing from each other. So here's a little snapshot of who is involved. So we've got the group of OT students. We have some members of the alcohol and drug service team. So the peer worker, Gemma, was really quite involved with providing some really, really great feedback around the resources and the language that was used, the accessibility. There was also the substance uses occupation special interest group that did give some really good feedback and helped with improving templates and that sort of thing too. So it was a big team effort. So we'll talk about the body zones ladder first and then move on to the pocket tool in a couple of minutes. So the idea of this is to create a really simple resource that can support somebody's awareness of their body arousal levels. So we've got down sort of on the left-hand side of the grey zone, this is where we're talking about hypoarousal, bodies moving really slowly. And then on the opposite end, we've got that red zone, which is an energy overload. So hyperarousal, things are moving really, really fast. And we've sort of got it as a sliding scale, so anywhere in between. So the idea here is really normalizing that humans shift from energy, like arousal levels, all of the time. So nobody's going to wake up, be in the green zone, be ready to go, and that's going to be their day. So I think it does sort of provide a platform to be able to have a conversation and really normalize that it's okay for energy levels to fluctuate and that we can have some influence over that. And a good starting point is to have that awareness of sort of how we're feeling there. So the idea was to enable self-regulation, to support clients to know when and how to use calming or alerting strategies. So if somebody's feeling really, moving slow on those more lower energy zones, it can be a good sign that it might be time to access an alerting type strategy that they may have if they do need to do something where there are those higher energy sort of requirements to complete the activity or the task. And it can provide a bit of scaffolding for sensory interventions as well. So knowing when to use sort of calming or alerting strategies as well. I do want to just highlight this word just right that's on the ladder here. So on the ladder, it does sort of sit in this green zone. That does not mean that that is always going to be just right. So if we look at the examples of, sleep or playing sports, sometimes the task demands do require higher or lower energy, and that's okay. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later. But yeah, just a disclaimer that this just right can move right to the bottom or right to the top of the ladder, depending on what the person wants or needs to do. So if this looks familiar, you've probably seen the zones of regulation. We've got the window of tolerance there as well. So it is communicating very similar things about, identifying your arousal levels and what is helpful or potentially a barrier to you being able to complete activities or whatever it is that you want to do. So essentially these resources kind of are a way of putting together and communicating 3 quite commonly used different, what's what I'm looking for, approaches that already exist. So we'll talk about that now. So with this resource, we do link it to the flip your lid or the hand model of the brain analogy, which is work by Dan Siegel, and the window of tolerance as well. So, and the idea is to use it to be able to help target appropriate intervention approaches. So those top-down approaches, which is more those cognitive based ones, talk-based therapy does require a lot of thinking, or those bottom-up approaches, which is more around prioritizing, you know, calming or alerting the body before we really dig into, you know, that more cognitive demanding approaches like, you know, talk-based therapy, problem solving, that sort of thing. I think it's a really great and simple tool to use as a check-in tool at the start of a session. It doesn't need to be part of, you know, this long-term intervention. And I think it is a way to really normalize just checking in with how your body's feeling as well. So I think that it is, and I know that everybody has different levels of how much they want to share of themselves in a session, but I think it's very appropriate for the therapist or the peer worker to check in with the tool first to really to model or provide an example of, you know, being able to identify where their current energy or arousal levels are at. So yeah, as I said, it can be part of a brief or ongoing intervention. We've got our hand model of the brain here. So really talking about connecting those thinking parts of the brain with the more limbic emotional sort of threat system of our brain there. So the idea that when both parts are talking together, that they're able to, we're sort of best positioned to, you know, plan, organize, solve problems, that sort of thing. So here we've got, I guess, the hand model of the brain sort of superimposed over the body zones ladder. Also a few little prompts around, you know, the gray and blue zones being that hypo arousal, so body slowing down, and the yellow and red zones being those hyper arousal. So on towards the extremes of either end of the ladder is where, you know, actions and thinking might be more dominated by that limbic system of the brain. And then we've just got a little prompt around that window of tolerance in there as well. So yeah, so sort of those middle zones there is where people may be able to access both the thinking and the emotional part of the brain to be able to manage and respond to stresses that may happen. Not to say that there's anything wrong with being in extremes at those ends. Sometimes it's a very normal and, you know, helpful response. And I think people that have experienced trauma or do have, you know, sensitivity to different changes in body arousal levels may find that they can skip a zone, and, you know, a small activating event can sort of, you know, send them to the red zone. And that's okay. It's just something that it means we need to take a slightly different approach or focus on different sort of skills to be able to support that person to calm or alert themselves. So what? So talking about this a bit more, in those extremes, so the grey zone or the red zone, it would likely be more helpful to the person to consider those bottom up support approaches. So, and again, reflecting on, I guess, your own experience or the experience of people close to you where there has been a really like significant activating event, it can be really hard to engage in that logic, problem solving, seeing alternative points of view, all of those approaches that do take a lot of thinking. So that's where you might just, you know, park doing quite heavy talk-based therapy and explore those sensory approaches to calm and alert the person. So in these middle zones, so we're talking about within our window of tolerance, this is where somebody might be more likely to actively participate and remember those cognitive approaches, so more talk-based therapy. Not to say that sensory approaches are not helpful here. So I think where sensory approaches can be really helpful is to help somebody maintain this optimal arousal level, to be able to continue to engage in the more cognitive or talk-based therapies. So just this idea of just right. So if we're talking the green zone, thinking brain, emotional brain, both online, this can be helpful for those tasks or activities that have quite cognitive demands. So learning, school work, conflict resolution, planning, organization, problem solving. Like if we can find ways to get into or maintain, that zone, then there's a little bit of construction happening outside my house. So sorry if my brain goes in a few different places. So here, the yellow zone. So this is sort of creeping up into those higher energy zones. So this can be helpful for, if you want to play with, or play sports, play with your children, or for performance, so athletic performance, like you want to be in a slightly higher energy zone. And red zone here, so again, very much around, we should be moving away from stigmatizing or judging these higher energy zones, because it is our survival brain kind of taking over there. So if you need to run away from something really, really fast, this is probably the zone you want to be in, yeah. But I think that it is just about when this is creeping up, when you do need to do activities that have lower energy demands, it can be really quite challenging for people. Blue zone, so this is moving into the lower energy zones. This can be helpful for body recovery, say if you've been ill, or if you're getting ready to go to sleep. So here's a little example, and I'm sure everybody's met a Stan in their settings that they're working in. So Stan explained that they need alcohol to sleep. Stan lives with anxiety, a home with conflict, and limited other strategies to wind down. They identified feeling in the red or yellow zones often. So Stan's little nervous system is going on overdrive, meaning that they're in that sort of creeping towards hyperarousal a lot of the time, which if we think about self-regulation on that physiological level, everything's moving really fast and not really conducive to your body getting signals that it's time for sleep. So in the absence of these skills that may not be there yet, Stan finds alcohol, which is a depressant substance. It slows the body down and does reduce that time between awake and being asleep. The impacts on sleep past falling asleep, there's a whole different can of worms, because we know that it doesn't help us get that really restorative and restful sleep. But I won't dig into that in the context of this presentation. So as an AOD worker or support worker, wherever you are, we can support Stan to recognize their body arousal levels and explore these alternative calming strategies for Stan to reach this just right body zone to help them reach their desired goal of sleeping. So this moves on to the pocket tool that was developed as an extension of this body zones ladder. So this is, I guess, the idea of taking the support or intervention out of the therapy space and into real life. So having something that is really accessible, people can have it on their keys in their car, on their bags, because we all know that we can do some really amazing work in the session, but if we're sending people away with A4 worksheets that may not have a place to safely store or access them when they really need it. It can be a barrier to people being able to identify and implement skills and strategies that we kind of explore within the counselling, therapy, or a peer support space. It can be really easily personalised. So people can add or remove cards based on what's appropriate to them and their needs. And it was also really intentionally done where there's no branding around substances or even really necessarily directly mental health. So something that is colourful, visually appealing, and people can have it on their person or nearby. So here's a couple of cards that kind of explore that red zone a little bit more. I do want to add that the template is on a Word document. So this is just an example. Depending on the person and their needs, you can change the prompts based on that person and what might be relevant or helpful to them and their needs. So the top one is one card. So one side, it's saying, hey, I'm in the red zone. These are some things that I may be feeling. And the side over are more specific prompts where people can sort of do that self-questioning. Or if it is, I guess there's a support person included, that external support can come into play by using it as a prompt to, the person that we're supporting. So I'm feeling, say, I'll give an example on the next slide, actually. And then the card down is kind of like cluing more into what's going on in your mind. What are these body signs that you might be in the red zone or hyperarousal? So here is an example where I'm feeling disrespected. Like, this is something that is a massive trigger, puts me straight into the red zone. Some calming strategies I can use. And I think it's really good to do some a little bit deeper work around these calming strategies with people, because I think sometimes if we know we've got limited time, we kind of tend to grab like a handful of strategies and throw them and just hope something fits. I do believe that, it can be more helpful to pick one or two or three things that are already working for the person, have worked in the past, or that they're willing to try. So this one, it might be remove myself from the situation, like go for a walk. That's something that might be the difference between me being in the red zone and the yellow zone. And we know that once we're in that yellow zone, we can start to use more of those cognitive processes a little bit more. Or doing heavy work. So resistance-based movement can be quite regulating for some people too. Over here, things that this person often notices, so getting stuck on thoughts, tight fits, so tension in their body, snapping at people. So that's, the seeing alternative points of view, the problem solving, the conflict resolution part of your brain, goodbye, not online, and that restlessness. Similarly, we've got the grey zone, so giving a couple of those prompts. What might you be feeling? So I think this sort of incorporates trying to create a bit of a vocabulary that's not just, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling, because I think what we do see a lot is we do see that primary emotion, which can be anger, but if we dig a little deeper, there's often a more helpful word that we can be using to describe, what is going on for that person in their body and their brains. So similar, an example of the grey zone, just in the conscious of time, so I'll skip past that one. So these are some of the cards for the yellow and the blue zone, or the green zone. So that's all the body zone, the body zone ladder cards covered. The pocket tool does include some cards around safety planning too. So we kind of wanted it to be a one-stop shop for, say, safety planning, self-regulation, and some of that relapse prevention conversations that we might have too. So also these cards are removable. So if somebody kind of sees it not applicable to me, they can easily take it off. So here we have some different support services, some safe people and places. People can include some strategies that work for them. The pocket tool comes with a couple of examples that we do sort of see or talk about regularly in the work that we do. But again, if people have something that works for them, you can really easily sit with them and make a card added to their thing to be able to customize it for them. All right, also adding those recovery focused things. So what are your goals? What are activities that you enjoy? This was the first template, and it was a lot of work to assemble the pocket tool. So I am not a very tech savvy person, so it did require a lot of like chopping and gluing things together. But then I had, after presenting these resources to the substance users occupation group, Irene Francisco, who is an amazing OT that's done some really great work in the AOD space, kindly probably had a little meltdown when she saw my template and made something that was like a lot more user friendly. And I think that it is something that probably cut down the time in making the resources by, 80%. So it is actually really quick and easy to put the resource together. Also, this resource is a Word document as well. So like I said, the template's there as an example, but the idea that it can be really customized based on the person and their circumstances too. All right, why did we make this all? So I have to, full disclosure, I'm not a cat person at all. But I did have a really great time doing a bit of a deep dive of cats fitting into really tiny spaces. And sometimes I think that we expect our clients or the people we're supporting to be like these cats, where we've got these templates or these resources that we have in our spaces, and we kind of, and I know that there's always the best intentions. I know I've done it myself where there's just not a lot of time to sit down and we just, go through a template quickly and hope for the best, so hoping that our clients can squeeze into our supports or interventions and, something can work. But and I think an example here is, say, if we would sat down and did a paper-based 10-page relapse prevention plan with somebody that is sleeping rough and they cannot safely store documents, or they have challenges with literacy, it is something where we're really expecting the client to be like the cat and fit into the resource. So I think sometimes spending that little bit of time really looking at their needs and their strengths and how can we make something that ticks the boxes that they want and do some meaningful work with people, can be good. So taking the time. So I'll talk a little bit about one example of a young person that I did do some work with these resources. So Lacey is a young person referred for support with methamphetamine and cannabis use following birth of their first child. Lacey has a diagnosis of BPD, mild intellectual disability, and a history of trauma, and often finds it tricky to regulate themselves and problem solve when big feelings pop up. This has often been a trigger for use, and Lacey wants to explore ways to manage this. So Lacey's coming in, ready, motivated to want to explore this more and build skills in this area. So I worked with Lacey on and off for about 6 months. And we probably did 2 or 3 sessions focusing on these body zone tools, but it was really helpful because it did create this shared language around checking in, identifying body arousal energy levels, and to do some really good work from there together. So some of the outcomes with Lacey was there was a reported increased ability to identify signs that they were approaching the red zone. So this was really helpful for doing some skills building because Lacey was quite disconnected from the way her body was feeling. So creating a little bit of that awareness around, am I in low energy or high energy zones, and what strategies would be most helpful to, calm or alert me was quite helpful. So Lacey also reported that holding onto and flipping through the tool was very grounding. So they were a very touch-seeking person, so I could kind of talk about their sensory preferences. So the fact that it was there, it was a physical, tactile tool. Sometimes it wasn't even reading the cards, it was just having that thing to hold on was grounding. Through having like the crisis and non-crisis supports on the cards, they reported that they'd accessed two new 24-hour support lines since having the tool. And this is somebody that hadn't accessed phone-based support prior to this as well. So that was a really big thing. Lacey added some personalized items to the tool, which included a picture of their kiddo, which was a really big reason for change. So yeah, it was pretty good outcomes there. So still work in progress, as we all are. But yeah, it is sort of gives a little bit of insight as to how the Pocket tool did support doing some good work in the space. Next one here. So the tool can just be sort of a starting point for people to get creative and make their own resources. So this is an example of a resource that was developed by a guest from Safe Space at Barton. So we started with the Body Zones Pocket tool as an example. We're kind of talking about body energy levels, putting words to that as well. But then they went away and just made this amazing resource. So a lot of it is around reinforcing DBT skills, mindfulness. So yeah, I think that I always get really stoked when, people really take the idea of the resource and then come back in with something that's like 50 times better and amazing. So this is just an idea of, I guess, looking at that accessibility and people making it their own. In making the resources, there's always going to be barriers and limitations. So it was in the middle of COVID lockdowns coming, sort of going off. So we couldn't see a lot of clients directly when we were developing the resource, which made it a little bit tricky because it is something that I feel like, I guess, works most effectively to work through in those in-person therapy sessions. But that probably says more about my preferences of how I like to support people as opposed to the resource itself. It does take some time to put the resource together. That time did get reduced a bit with the new template that Irene put together for us. And it is just around that ongoing support and promoting the resource too. So, and I guess where to from here, just continue trialing the resources around different settings and getting client and worker feedback, promoting it with the team, and always modifying resources in response to feedback as well. So it's a starting point. And yeah, that idea that it is something that can be modified based on the person and their needs. So that's it from me. I'm done. Michelle, I finished on time.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Meg. I'm just trying to get my video to go on. There we go. That was fantastic. I've got a lot going through my mind. We don't have any questions at the moment, except that a lot of people are interested in accessing those resources and the Pocket tool. So at this point, we've let people know that we hope to house that on the Insight website in the future and the Sensory Approaches Toolkit in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, with Meg's permission, so thank you, Meg, we've added your email there if people wish to contact you for that. There's a lot of positive feedback and people are feeling inspired and really liking the fact that these are modifiable and people can personalize these tools. Someone has said, asked a question, are there any safe spaces in Metro South? So that is south side of Brisbane for those people joining us from all over the different areas.
So with that one, so not as part of the Safe Space network that's happening at the Brisbane North, the closest thing that I can think of, and if there's anyone joining in from Metro South, you can absolutely correct me if I'm wrong, there is a crisis support space that is attached to the PA hospital. So not, I guess, community-based per se, like you still need to go through emergency, but it is I guess similar in that it is peer-led. They have a lot of, it is different to, I guess, clinical-based intervention. So I guess is run and looks like some of the safe spaces, but yeah, you do have to go through ED to access that crisis support space. So that one is run by Brookred, which are an amazing peer organization on the south side. Yeah, so hopefully, I guess, fingers crossed, touch wood, some more safe spaces do pop up in the wider Brisbane area. But yeah, as far as I know on the south side, that is the closest thing to a safe space.
Thanks, Meg. And Tamara, who's online, has echoed that yes, it's not a 24-hour service, but a great alternative to ED for anyone in crisis. Okay, so here's a question from someone. What are your thoughts on introducing emotional regulation in the first few sessions prior to doing intensive AOD recovery focused actions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I kind of feel like depending on where the client or the person that we're supporting is at, while we're working in the AOD space, people may not be ready to have the conversation about substances straight up. So I think any work you can do in the space that is sort of directly or indirectly addressing that function of the substance is totally relevant. Like I've done some work with people where, we hardly directly talk about substances. It's more around, that function. So I think if it is around the substances are being used to regulate emotions or body arousal levels, then 100%. Like I think if you start off by talking around that, if that's a safe topic that is still going to support skill building, and maybe reduce the dependency on substances to change emotions or body states, then 100%. Like I think that it's still meeting the same need. It's still supporting them with that awareness around what's going on in their bodies and their brains, and skill building, that changes it from it being like, if substance is like option A and that's all they got to regulate emotions or body states, if you are kind of working on developing an option B, C, and D, it's okay if you don't, talk about substances in the first session or two. That is just me. And yeah, some other people might have different perspectives on that, but I think it's kind of in the spirit of having a bit more of that softer entry approach for, people that are a little bit unsure around, or it is quite, there's barriers to talking about substance use directly. What do you reckon, Michelle?
Oh, thank you for your response. I feel that way too. I think this is very empowering. So in the moment, people can be assisted to actually feel different, feel like they might have more charge of their body, and everything else in that moment, and that might be a really important part of their health and well-being, to feel more empowered and in charge of themselves.
Yeah.
There is another question here, a practical question. Alicia from Logan Wellbeing Team, thank you so much for today's presentation. Just asking, do you usually set the tool up and laminate it, then take it into your session and people write with a a permanent marker, or do they maybe they can rub it out if they want to, or do you fill in the doc electronically after meeting with them and doing some sessions, or maybe you have choices around that?
Yeah, I think that what I've learned the hard way in the AOD space is, like, sometimes I get really excited about interventions or support that may go over a couple of sessions, and you might only see somebody once or twice, and it can never sort of come to fruition, you know. Like, so I would always have a few blank template resources there ready to go, and I think that that way is where you can just, you know, write on it with a say a permanent marker, and it can just be wiped out with like a little alcohol swab or similar. It kind of does lean into that it can be changeable. So I think what you might your body signs might change depending on the zone. The word that you would give how you're feeling might change. So I think that that works there. I think if it is somebody that you're working over a longer period of time, you know, you're going to see them again, it's usually the same stuff that's coming up. I think it can be a really nice touch to make a personalized resource. But yeah, I'm very conscious around in the AOD space. We may only see people a couple of times. So I think being able to have something ready to go for people to take away with them as soon as there is that sort of interest or spark in doing work in the space, I think is really important. So yeah, that was a really long-winded answer of saying both ways can be fine depending on the person.
Thank you, Meg. Well, look, there's no more questions. There are just lots of great comments. Thanking you for this very practical tool, and what I feel like, you know, in hearing you present and this project that you all did together and feedback from the people who are using it, is you've taken a range of quite complex things and integrated them for us through a simple tool. You know, we've got all those different tasks that people want to do, their different substances. We've got those zones of regulation and the hand model around distress and trauma, dysregulation, and you've helped us to navigate that in a way that feels really doable. So a lot of people are looking forward to trying that out and saying thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, I did forget to say at the end of the presentation, yeah, more than happy to share these resources with people that are interested. My email has been popped into the chat box. So yeah, just Meg Schneck 1@gmail.com. If you want to touch base or talk more, get your hands on these resources, yeah, more than happy to share them.
Thank you so much, Meg, for joining us today and for that wonderful presentation.
No worries at all. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your day to listen to me talk. I know I get a bit overexcited about stuff sometimes.
Oh, you know, as you say, this is for us all. I'm looking forward to using this for myself and my family.